This video is brought to you by Brilliant. It looks like EU enlargement is back on the table. After years of fatigue, there's a renewed interest, and the EU seems to be finally going back to its expansionist roots. In late August of this year, the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, urged expansion by 2030, potentially increasing members from 27 to 36. Subsequently, in early November, the European Commission announced its 2023 enlargement package, detailing progress for accession for 6 Balkan countries and a new association trio consisting of Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. This is a pretty big deal. So the big question is, with 8 countries in the waiting room, who will be the next EU member? In this video, we're going to have a look at how countries are progressing with their EU applications, what obstacles they face, and ultimately which country is most likely to gain membership first. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, to give a bit of context, it's been 10 years since the EU last granted membership to a candidate country, Croatia, in 2013. And the last few enlargement waves go even further back to the early 2000s, with Romania and Bulgaria in 2007 and 10 new members joining in 2004. Since then, enlargement fatigue has dominated EU politics. Do check out the previous videos where we go deeper into what EU enlargement fatigue is and why attitudes have changed. But essentially, it refers to the fact that, in large part due to internal disputes, the EU has developed a hesitation to accept new members. This could all be changing pretty soon, and whilst there still remains division between member states with regards to how and when enlargement happens, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has brought a new geopolitical and perhaps moral urgency to progressing potential members' applications after a decade of stagnation. Let's see which countries are on track to become the next members of the EU. Joining the EU is no easy feat, and involves several steps. First, countries send a formal application, and are subsequently granted candidate status. Then membership negotiations can start. But this process can be lengthy, and not only depends on the country's preparedness, but also the political landscape of Europe. Turkey was the first to apply for membership back in 1987, and it wasn't until 17 years later and the dissolution of Yugoslavia in the 90s that other countries began to apply. So next came North Macedonia in 2004, Montenegro in 2008, Serbia and Albania in 2009, and Bosnia and Herzegovina applied last in 2016. Between 2016 and 2022, no new applications were made, but 2022 was massive for EU enlargement. Just 4 days into Russia's invasion, Ukraine applied for EU membership. Georgia initially planned to send their application in 2024, but did so 2 years earlier, a few days after Ukraine on March the 3rd, the same day as Moldova. A few months later, in December 2022, Kosovo applied for EU membership as a symbolic act in the midst of a license plate dispute with Serbia. Anyway, these are all the countries to have so far applied for membership, which takes us to the next step involved, receiving formal candidate status. Candidate status is the first official step to EU membership, and it basically means the European Commission has approved an application in principle, subject to that country fulfilling various criteria. Anyway, the first 5 countries we mentioned all received candidate status relatively quickly, within 3 years of their application. Montenegro, Albania and North Macedonia were all helped by the fact that they were members of NATO first, which often precedes EU membership. It took Bosnia and Herzegovina a bit longer, but was granted candidate status in 2022. Moldova and Ukraine have set a new record, managing to complete all necessary steps and receive candidate status in a span of 3 months. Unfortunately, 2 applicant countries are still yet to receive candidate status: Kosovo and Georgia. Kosovo currently lacks the necessary administrative capacity and sector-wide coordination to be considered a candidate, whilst Georgia's democratic backsliding and Russian influence needs to be addressed before its candidacy can be confirmed, although it should be noted that in November the Commission recommended granting candidate status to Georgia. All in all, this means that there are currently 8 countries with candidate status. So who's going to be first to join? Well, the last step towards EU membership is the negotiation process. The Commission suggests a draft plan for these talks, and they start once member states agree. These talks follow EU laws, known as the Acquis Communautaire, divided into 35 chapters under 6 categories: fundamentals, internal market, competitive and inclusive growth, green agenda and sustainable connectivity, resources, agriculture and cohesion, and external relations. Every year, the Commission reviews these parts for each applicant country, a process known as screening, and assigns each of the 35 chapters a status from early stage to good level of preparation. Early stage essentially implies that a country has problems in that particular area, while a good level of preparation means that that country has basically finished that chapter. Once countries have made reasonable progress on a chapter, the EU Commission can open the chapter for formal negotiations. Once the Commission is satisfied with progress and reform in that chapter, the chapter can be closed, and once all chapters have been closed, the country is ready for accession. So let's see how each country is progressing with their negotiations. After years of stalled negotiations, Turkey suspended negotiations and talks with the EU in 2019, so it's no longer a real contender. Looking purely at chapters, in first place is Montenegro, which has opened all 33 relevant chapters and successfully closed 3, with 11 chapters at a good level of preparation, and none in the dreaded early stages. The EU has also developed deep economic ties with Montenegro, backing projects like the Montenegro-Serbia rail interconnection and the Trans-Balkan electricity corridor. The EU even provided an energy support package and €30 million in grant funding to Montenegro during last year's energy crisis. Even though Montenegro is the most likely candidate, progress has been hindered by political instability, with the country currently being led by a caretaker government. The Commission has stated that no further chapters will be closed until Montenegro improves its rule of law, and stable politics would go some way to resolving this. Next is Serbia, which has opened 22 chapters and closed 2, with 7 chapters at a good level of preparation and none in the early stages. Leaving aside the contentious issue of Kosovo, which we'll get onto in a second, Serbia's progress in developing a market economy and strengthening judicial independence means it's closer to accession than previously. Next up are Albania and North Macedonia. Macedonia has 2 chapters in the early stage, and 7 at the good level, with Albania at only 1 early stage and 5 good levels. However, in our estimation, Albania is slightly ahead due to the fact that it's fully completed the screening process, and is therefore ready to open chapters, whilst Macedonia still has 7 chapters to be screened. Next up is Ukraine, which has made significant progress with its domestic reforms recently, and now has 4 chapters at a good level, with 5 in the early stages. Then we have Moldova, which has 1 chapter at a good level and 7 in the early stages. While neither country has finished screening, both have made significant progress recently, and the Commission recently recommended that the Council open accession negotiations with both countries. Moldova still seems a long way off with corruption and Russian interference, particularly through exiled oligarch-funded parties, which are significant concerns in the upcoming local elections. On top of all this, there's the issue of Transnistria, a pro-Russian separatist region which would make accession immensely difficult. In last place comes Bosnia and Herzegovina, with a whopping 13 chapters in the early stage. Bosnia's accession has been hamstrung by issues caused mainly by the entity Republika Srpska's defiance of the Constitutional Court reintroducing defamation penalties and proposing a law to label civil society groups as foreign agents. Its application could be further hindered by the dodgy alignment with Russia under the leadership of Republika Srpska's Milorad Dodik. In reality, however, a country's accession prospects depend not just on chapter progress, but also geopolitics, and this is where things get a little complicated. While Serbia, for example, has made significant progress on its chapters, accession still looks unlikely, given both President Vucic's balancing act between Europe and Russia and the ongoing issue of Kosovo. Kosovo's bid to join the EU isn't looking too hot either, for the same reason, but also because Kosovo isn't recognised by some aspiring association trio countries and 5 EU member states, who've refused to recognise Kosovo for fear of encouraging domestic separatist movements. Even though Serbia's a bit ahead in the game with candidate status, there's a chance that Serbia and Kosovo could both get into the EU at the same time to speed things up. Because some analysts think that that's the only way to get either of them, given they'd veto one another if they got into the EU first. To spice things up further, the EU is pushing Ukraine and Moldova to get on board quickly, as evidenced by the fact that they received candidate status 4 months post-invasion. The EU even argued that Moldova can join without resolving the Transnistria dispute, and in December, the 27 EU heads of government will meet in Brussels to decide on whether or not to begin accession negotiations in Ukraine. Given that the 2023 enlargement package dropped in November, it's looking more and more likely that the European Council might give Ukraine the green light. However, even if negotiations begin, it would take a really long time for Ukraine to become a member, and could prove controversial, not least because fast-tracking their application would be unfair to other Balkan candidate states. Furthermore, joining the EU free market is a big deal, and in Ukraine, little to no progress has been made in competition, economic and monetary policy. With an ongoing war, difficulties integrating Ukraine's enormous agricultural output into the EU Common Agricultural Policy, and corruption problems means that it's at least possible that Ukraine ends up in never-ending talks that don't really get them anywhere, and a lot depends on the upcoming EU discussions in December. All in all, while the EU is clearly keen to accelerate Ukraine's application, and certain Western Balkan countries, like North Macedonia and Albania, have been hanging around waiting for ages, it seems that Montenegro is the most likely candidate to be next up for membership. It's way ahead of the other countries in its chapter progression, and is the least politically controversial country to join. Let us know in the comments who you think will be the next EU member. A lot of the stuff that we talk about at TLDR can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive into economics and detailed data. But there's a fun and easy way to learn more, which also doesn't cost thousands of dollars or take years and years of schooling. That's because Brilliant is the best way to learn maths, data science and computer science interactively. It doesn't even take long to learn either. These complex topics are broken down into accessible chunks, designed around your busy schedule. That means that by spending just a few minutes a day, you can accumulate new knowledge over time in an actually fun way. As time goes on, you'll get used to that empowering feeling of learning too, because this isn't just about memorization and lectures. Brilliant teaches you by doing, using active learning techniques to teach you the principles behind otherwise complex subjects, and ensuring you actually understand what's going on. So whether you want to brush up on your basic math skills, improve your employment prospects by learning about future technologies, or just have fun with coding, you can check out everything that Brilliant has to offer free for a full 30 days. Click on the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Thanks for your support.